the Ticats Audio Network. This is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
Please stack your CFL's top three. What is Victor Cui's legacy? Does success for Nathan Rourke in the NFL help or hurt the Canadian game, and has tackling become a lost skill on defense? This is the CFL This Week. I'm Bubba O'Neil. You're hooked on to the Top 3 Down podcast that offers opinions, information, and a few laughs from the top insiders, columnists, and broadcasters from all across the nation. Joining me on the pod this week, in addition to being TSN's, well, at least one of their top panelists, he's breaking news every single day, it seems. David Naylor, certainly thanks for joining us. And I know you're on the road.
I am. I am in Dearborn, Michigan, on the midst of the Nathan Rourke tour, who I just saw in Dallas the other day, and I will see at Jags Lions joint practices this week, and then for preseason game number 2, Saturday at Ford Field.
Hey, also doing an outstanding job of covering the league and writing from a Winnipeg perspective from the Free Press. He's Jeff Hamilton.
Great gig, Dave. Hey, good to see you. Good to be here, guys. Always a pleasure. Got a great panel. Looking forward to the topics.
Hey, he has the Lions and the Canucks covered like a thick blanket out in BC. He's worked with some of the best in the business out west. From UNREEL Sports, he's Scott Rintoul. Thanks for joining us, Scott. First time this year.
Appreciate the invitation with this esteemed panel. Let's get it going, Bubba.
You know what, guys? Let's start off the top here, and of course, TSN's Farhan Laji breaks some late news last night that Edmonton Elks president and CEO Victor Cui is stepping down. Dave, I know you're close to the situation. What can you tell us? And I'll ask you, does he leave some type of legacy in Edmonton?
You know, last night I had a conversation with a source and was trying to look for the second line of that story, right? The first line is the Elks and Victor Cui part ways. What's the second line? And, you know, I think it is that, you know, he was not able to lead that organization and get, you know, full buy-in from everybody. And that may be, I'm not talking necessarily the people below him. I think to some degree that's the people above him, the board. Look, I've only talked to Victor Cui, you know, extensively once, and it was when he got the job. We had a nice chat about how we were both at the Commonwealth Games in 1998 in Malaysia at the same time. You know, and I thought that a guy who came from sort of a non-traditional background of not somebody who was sort of embedded in the CFL or necessarily in the local sports community, but had roots in the local community, I thought it was a genius hire. And look, I think it's tough to evaluate him for no other reason than the fact, you know, his team didn't win a home game during his tenure. I mean, he will forever be remembered for that. And, you know, ultimately what I was kind of led to believe was, look, he didn't deliver with results off the field, and he didn't deliver with results on the field. And, you know, I think it's also a tricky part that he did not hire Chris Jones. You know, the Elks went ahead and decided to make that hire before they hired a president. Usually, I mean, this stuff is linear, right? President, GM, head coach, coordinators, position coaches. When you mess up with that order, you put yourself at risk. And you know, ultimately, I think it's really tough to know, you know, what to make of Victor Cui because of the dynamics that were around that situation, the way the organization was handcuffed by the CFL's operations cap. And, you know, we may really never know that much more than that.
Jeff, it appeared he had all kinds of great ideas when he came in. And I thought the story was wonderful because he was sort of that local guy stepping in.
Absolutely. And brought with him a passion we've seen in other markets with Amar Doman in BC, you know, Montreal's new ownership, that local connection, that willingness, that passion to be inspired, to try to inspire a community to bring 3-down football. I mean, that was Victor Cui's entrance into the team, but his exit is anything but positive. I mean, and I don't think, you know, this isn't a bash Victor Cui situation, because I think if anything was working in some ways, it was kind of his drive, right? He refused to give up. He refused to throw the towel in. He talked about how they were going to get out of this. He waded through all those difficult times, but to Dave's point, I mean, how do you remember him for anything other than being attached to the ugliest, darkest time in Edmonton football history? I mean, they didn't win a home game. Victor Cui had his missteps over his tenure. I mean, he guaranteed 3 wins in a row at one point over Twitter and lost all 3 of those games. There's a lot of writing, a lot of, videos coming out of that football town of, where's the board on all this, right? Jerry Monadon wrote a great, scathing column against the board. And I think he was aiming it outside of Victor Cui, which is the interesting part. I'm with Dave. I kind of want to know the whole story on this because I don't think the Edmonton Elks board got together and was like, let's get rid of this guy with all the ideas and passion. I think it's got to be a mutual thing where Victor Cui just doesn't feel like he's set up to succeed there because as unsuccessful as the Elks were under his tenure, he was set up to fail in a lot of ways because if your on-field product is as bad and as dismal as we've seen the Elks over the last year and a half, it doesn't matter how many new initiatives you bring to fans. It doesn't matter, how groundbreaking you can be with and some of the great things they did, right? Whether that was, a lot of the initiatives of voicing, having different broadcasts, all those things under his tenure, all the efforts he made to bring in fans. Hell, he wanted to give free tickets to home games. I mean, this guy believed in the on-field product. He was let down heavily by Chris Jones and company. And when all is said and done and people look back on this era, it won't be Victor Cui that they're looking at. It'll be Chris Jones and how he thought he was bringing better days to Edmonton and fell incredibly short.
Well, Scott, where do you fall on that? Because I know as, fans, whether you're paying for the seats or you're not, or you're watching on television, media, just the general community, we do tend to want to point a finger and blame someone. Is he the guy that takes the blame?
He certainly doesn't take all of the blame. He'll take some of the blame because he's attached to it. He's at a premium position within the organization. But I'm on board with much of what Jeff said. This is a person who came into the CFL with some innovative ideas in arguably the most traditional market in the league. I know you can make arguments for others, but Edmonton is straight down the middle. It's winning football. That's the tradition of the Edmonton Elks organization. And you can talk about having a party and doing all these different things and being accessible on social media. But in that market specifically, if you don't win any games, and I mean none, that fan base will not respond. And unfortunately, that's what Victor Cui fell victim to in Edmonton. I liked the innovation. It wasn't for a lack of effort. Yes, he wears some of this just like every other person in the organization. But at some point in that market, there has to be a bottom line. And the bottom line has been so far in the red for so long that unfortunately for him, he was unable to move the needle.
I got a bit of a theory on this one, and I'll just throw this out here. As I understand it, the board can only fire one person, the CEO. They can't fire the coach. They can't fire coordinators. The only one that they can fire is Victor Cui. And Victor Cui can't fire anybody on the staff because of the Elks screwed up cap situation. So what has everybody been saying in Edmonton all year? Sort of something's got to change. Something's got to happen. Something's got to happen. Well, we finally saw the thing with the switch with McAdoo and Jarius Jackson. But in terms of the board and what it could do, that's actually the only thing they could do was to fire him.
Jeff, it's funny because I think everyone looks at the Elks, the Edmonton CFL franchise. It's long been said the model franchise, the one that everyone achieves to be like. And it just hasn't been like that for 3 years now.
Yeah, I think obviously what they were able to achieve in their history, winning those 5 in a row the Bombers were trying to chase that last year. I think that's kind of spilled over to the tradition, just like they're known as the city of champions with a lot of the success the Edmonton Oilers have had. I mean, the standard has been down the highway in Calgary for 10 years, in between those years, and now it's moved over to Winnipeg, right? I mean, it's a proud group in that, much like a lot of the prairie teams, they get behind their CFL clubs, and to Scott's point, they are a very traditional group, right? I mean, you just have to look at the name change and how much people put on the name change for the reason why they're not winning games on the field to understand just how much tradition matters in that market. It's ludicrous in a lot of ways, but that's the market that they are. And, to Scott's point too, I mean, he said the they're not going to respond. They're not going to respond positively. I think they have responded in not coming to the games, and that's been, at a certain point in time, whether you're strapped with the coach's cap, whether you're strapped with paying your quarterback $100,000 next season, all these things you think you can do on the field, eventually it doesn't matter to anybody else, because you're not, the hardcore, the fair weather, the whatever, they just want change. And so when you can make that change at the top, sometimes that's all you need to do. And I can see Victor Cui, and this is just a gut feeling, or at least something I think is possible, him going in there and saying, maybe I'm the problem, right? Or maybe the change needs to be at the top, right? I don't think he would admit that what he's done is put this team disarray, but the need for change. A leader understands when change is needed. And, the sad part is that I don't think Victor Cui will be remembered at all for his tenure because of how short it was, but he will be remembered for what he wanted to do with this, his hometown club and couldn't achieve it.
Fluid situation. We'll be keeping our eyes on this one and maybe more to talk about next week. Scott Rintoul, the question is simple. Bombers, Lions, Argonauts. Stack them 1, 2, 3, please.
Well, I know that everybody thinks the West Coast bias is coming, but they could not be further from the truth. The Toronto Argonauts are the number 1 team in the Canadian Football League as it stands. They are not as battle-tested as their other 2 combatants that are in this category right now, because they've only played the BC Lions. They haven't faced Winnipeg yet. But that return for Chad Kelly was sensational. They put up points when they want to. They put them up for fun. The Toronto Argonauts, yeah, they've had the buys, but the Toronto Argonauts are the number 1 team. Number 2 is really difficult, and some of it's recency bias because these 2 teams played a couple of weeks ago, but I'm going to give the nod to the defending Western champions. I'm going to leave Winnipeg number 2. They had an opportunity to fall last week. Zach Claros goes down early, and Drew Brown comes in and lights it up like that and finds a way down 22 points. I'm going to leave Winnipeg there because these 2 teams have split the season series to this point. BC, massive bounce-back game, number 1 defense in the league, and right now it's not terribly close, but BC right now remains in number 3 in my power rankings at the top.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'm going to go Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Toronto Argonauts, BC Lions. And look, their Bombers have had some games this year where they don't look like the Bombers. And, one of them was almost last week. But you know what that game reminded me of? Against Edmonton. You turn on a college football game sometime and it's like a huge mismatch, and all you're watching is the clock because the other team's coming back. It's not a matter of if they're coming back. It's if they're going to. And I honest to goodness, other than the full moon plays that the Elks got out of that game and Zach getting hurt, I thought they could have beat Edmonton by like 35. That game was not close. And when you think of what they did, in the previous game against the BC Lions, even the game, this is the weirdest thing I'm going to say about the game. When you look at all these teams and BC, I think it's close, right? Because, Toronto trounced BC, but other than the 6 picks Vernon threw, what? Yeah, actually, other than the 6 picks Vernon threw, he had a really good day. So, I think all of these are pretty close. I was not surprised the Bombers came back on BC the way they did. Obviously was surprised the degree to which they did it. But, hey, look, this team has ruled the roost for a while. I think when they are on, they are still the very best team. I guess the one thing I would say is that they haven't always been on. But when they're clicking on all cylinders, on a good day, I still think nobody beats the Bombers.
Who do you guys 2 or 3 though?
Oh, Argos 2, BC 3. Yeah, no, there's no question. But again, I think that's close. Even though if you look at the score between Toronto and BC when they faced each other, it didn't look close because of Vernon's propensity to give the ball away. It's a very unusual thing to say that a quarterback had a great day on a day he threw 6 picks. I wouldn't say it's a great day, but usually when a guy throws 6 picks, the rest of his game is a disaster as well. And that was a real anomalous kind of performance from Vernon Adams. And again, I when those teams play each other again, I don't think that's necessarily going to be, blowout Argos.
Jeff, you're smirking.
Yeah, I'm with Scott. I'm going to go Argos number 1.
Wow.
I'm going Argos number 1 because I'm a bit of a traditionalist like that. They're the best team, they have the best record right now at 7-1. They beat the Bombers in the Grey Cup last year. They handled BC when they needed to. They lost in a game. They lost Chad Kelly early into the second quarter. So they're a really good team. They got a great defense. And until the Bombers play the Argos, that will determine in my mind who's 1 and 2. But right now, I give the edge to the Argos. Now, it's a slim edge. I have the Bombers right after that, and I have the BC Lions right after that, obviously. And I just think, what's the common denominator with these three teams? They all got a good quarterback. And, at least a quarterback that can show up and win games. And the Bombers, though, like, if it was a different question, if your question, Bubba, was if I had to pick a team who is going to win the Grey Cup right now between all three of those, I'd take the Bombers in a championship win-all game. But right now, I think Toronto deserves the respect they've had. Dave said off camera, I was kind of critical of Chad Kelly. Certainly didn't think that, my comments... Well, I was critical. I said I didn't think there was any chance that Toronto, under Chad Kelly's tutelage, within the moment of his career now. I'm not saying down the road. I thought it was too early to give him the keys to the car. It certainly wasn't. I rolled back those comments in later columns, and so I just I'm not riding the Kelly train just yet in the sense that I think he is somehow going to lead them to a consecutive Grey Cup, but I do think they deserve the honor of being the best team in the CFL right now.
Jeff, you said three teams that all have really good play at quarterback. There are also three teams that have good defenses.
Absolutely. What's the key to having a good defense? Having an offense that can stay on the field. Because we've seen the games in the two games the Bombers have lost. They've lost because their offense hasn't been able to stay on the field and left out their defense to dry. And you could say the exact same thing about BC against Winnipeg in that drubbing. One thing I will say about BC, I really, really like BC. I think they're trying to build the Bomber model. The Toronto's a different model. The Toronto's chaos, organized chaos. I think Ryan Dinwiddie is a mad scientist. I think he's going to be a very, very good coach for a very long time in this league. I think he's created that, but I think the BC Lions are doing what the Bombers did. They're bringing in a good leadership core. They have continuity on both sides of the ball, and that's really showing right now. I think that what the Lions need to be that upper echelon team or to be the class of the CFL is to learn how to win. Those guys to me are still like, I saw this like 4 days later after the Bombers win, and they gave it to the Bombers in week 3, right? 4 days later on a Monday, you had guys posting on social media about coming into your house and doing whatever they wanted. Well, they went into Toronto the next week and got their asses handed to them. And that tells me that if it's one thing to be able to handle the losses, you also got to be able to handle the wins, but the BC Lions are a very good team.
Here's what's the interesting thing to me about the BC Lions. Of the three teams we mentioned, I don't think we've seen the ceiling for the BC Lions yet because that offense hasn't all come together. Vernon Adams has had a lot of really good days. He's also had some days where he hasn't seen the field as well as he's able. And certainly the Toronto day is a weird one day, but that one speaks to it as well. If they get those top three receivers going on the same day, and they haven't done that yet, the sky is the limit because, as I said, their defense right now has set itself apart from the rest of the CFL.
Dave, we're speaking about these three teams as in the present, but just looking forward, the fact that the Argonauts have used up all three of their bye weeks, is that concerning to you?
Yeah, it is a little bit. I mean, this is why we need a 10th team in this league, because of stuff like this. And yeah, I mean, having rest matters in football. So especially down the back half of the stretch, and you start to say, well, when injuries start to mount, right? Other teams are getting 2 weeks to get players back that aren't even practicing, right? They're able to just kind of completely chill, and the Argos aren't going to have that. The other thing about the Argonauts in terms of how you project them through the year, I'll just bring up this one point about Chad Kelly. What are the Argos now? Are they 6-1 or 7-1?
7-1.
7-1. Okay. Chad Kelly has started 9 games in 7 years. Like when he started week 21 last year against the Montreal Alouettes and meaning this game, that's his first start since 2016. He has not played a whole lot of football. So, when you start to look at, okay, he's come along faster than, and that's, to Jeff's point, that was a good reason to doubt that he was ready for this, because not only had he only been back of the CFL for 1 year, he just hasn't played the game very much, and since college. So as he gets more experience, more familiarity with the CFL game, and just frankly playing more football, there's reason to believe we have not seen the upside of Chad Kelly thus far.
Based on his performance last week, that's downright scary, guys. I mean, he looked unbelievable. Okay, guys, I don't know if this is a CFL thing or an NFL thing, but I'm watching more and more defensive backs on long pass plays try and torpedo receivers as opposed to wrapping them up, which leads me to ask this question, Jeff, because it's become, I think I'm noticing more and more of it, has tackling, as we know it, become a lost art in football?
Absolutely, it has. And this isn't a 2023 thing. This has been going on for years. I mean, if you look at it, and there's so many different angles you can take within this argument, is that you look at one side. We obviously know how concussions have dominated the narrative around football for years, right? The media has run with the concussion narrative. It's made headshots, high head hits, not only illegal, but Sean DuPont suspensions are higher than they've ever been. So players are just, where they were once conditioned to go after that head to really put a guy out, they're now no longer doing that. So then you have the NCAA, who I want to acknowledge way more of the lower end tackling. It's the knee injuries. It's the season ending, injuries to ankles and knees to star players that is hurting their product. So now players don't want to go low. So there's this fear of where do you go, right? And then you factor in, obviously, the rules that have changed over the years to benefit offense, that have put defenders, particularly defensive backs, in very difficult situations, because anyone who's played football, those bang tackle hits are very easy to judge when you see them, live, hard to judge when you're in them. And so, you look at the way practicing methods have gone. People aren't practicing with pads anymore. So, you're trying to protect your own quarterbacks, your running backs, your star receivers. So, the defenses aren't getting that, training as much as they used to. And, you add all these things up, there's now companies that are coming into play here that are trying to bring in this like new techniques, incorporating things like rugby tackling, where you lead with your shoulder and, to your point, Bubba, wrap up. And now they're talking with Ohio State University is dealing with these kind of groups. Like there's top end, NCAA Division I football teams that are getting help right now, trying to figure out a way to master practicing tackling, let alone executing that in the game. So it really has changed, but it's changed because right now, or years ago, football was headed on a path of extinction. I mean, the injuries, the lawsuits, all those things, something needed to give. The result of that is now tackling is being questioned every step of the way. And we really, and players you hear about in the CFL, you hear about in the NFL, it's really hard on what's legal and what's not, and executing the games become that much more difficult because of it.
Dave, have you noticed this? It just looks defensively, teams just look sloppy out there.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing, and I would concur with Jed that I don't think it's a 2023 phenomenon. But you bring up a good point, even about like sticking the CFL, where guys aren't making $1 zillion. If you're a defensive back, do you want to get fined every week? Like that's. I mean, there's a bit of financial self-preservation in this as well, right? In terms of what you can do and what you can't do. Never mind taking flags for your team because of the way the game is played. And I'm going to throw out a term that is from an obsolete term in football that not that long ago was part of the regimen, two-a-days. Even I've been doing some NFL camps this summer. NFL training camp is done by 11 a.m. Finished. There's no more players on the field after 11 a.m. because they don't practice two-a-days anymore. In fact, the NFL did away with two-a-days before the CFL did. Because I remember when they got rid of them, so when CFL GM phoned me and said, okay, ours are gone. Like, if they're not doing two-a-days, we're not doing two-a-days. So just even the amount of training camp practice you get is reduced. So I think when you talk about some of the factors that Jeff did and just the lack of practice time and the lack of full contact practice time, it all plays into it.
Scott, go ahead.
Well, Bubba, to add to that, and to Jeff's point, this tackling situation has been going on for a long time. The Seattle Seahawks have been having rugby consultants and people from different contact sports with them for a number of years. You can argue whether it's worked or not, but they've been trying innovative techniques. Some of it is that teams aren't willing to lose players in practice, so they don't hit in practice. They don't tackle in practice anymore. We've had this conversation about preseason games in both leagues for a lot of times. Is it worth the risk? Well, it's certainly not worth the risk in practice. Nobody wants to see friendly fire, if you want to call it that, take out a star player. So teams aren't even practicing it in what we consider traditional practice. The other part is this, especially in the secondary. What's a game-changing play anymore? It's a turnover, and it's been that way for a long time. So you see defensive backs targeting turnovers instead of tackles. And it's funny because as we talk about the top defenses, whether it's south of the border or north of the border, they end up being the defenses that not only can force some turnovers, but defenses that tackle. And that ends up being the separating factor between these top Ds. Hey, who wraps up? Who limits yards after catch? We know you're going to catch the football because the rules have been set up for the offenses to succeed. But can you limit the damage after that? Those two factors to me have certainly coalesced to bring us to the situation where I think as traditional football fans, we're often shaking our heads going, how did he not bring that guy down 10 yards earlier?
Jeff, he brings up a wonderful point. You watch any defensive player who gets run by, once they're trying to catch them, the idea is to strip before the tackle.
Oh, you see 5 or 6 guys swapping at the ball, that's usually, obviously that's they practice that. I mean, you just have to watch one CFL practice to see the swatting going on, right? It's the ball's the most important part, and as Scott mentioned, turnovers are key in changing the play of games. I think it's, even just to talk about Dave's point about, the two-a-days. I mean, if you look at around the CFL, they've changed the way they do training camps significantly. I mean, teams are tired of guys showing up and then within the first 3 or 4 days that there's 5 or 6 hamstrings, right? Like the idea, injuries or what we saw in Riderville not too long ago with all those Achilles injuries. That was more fluke than anything. But, I think it's less about trying to find the toughness in the player immediately and seeing how you can get guys out. And instead you're seeing, players ease into a lot of this. And another point that Dave made, I'll continue to touch on, is that guys don't make enough money in the CFL to put it out all on the line in practice. That's why when the PA sat down with the league and talked about what they wanted out of practice, a big thing for them, for the players, following the Jonathan Hefney injuries, the catastrophic neck injury that he suffered, was we don't want to, you're not going to protect us for the long-term future. We don't want to put our we want to do everything we possibly can to alleviate those risks. And certainly it starts with practice. Guys, there's some guys that love the idea of hitting in practice. There's just guys that are hardwired that way, but there are several more out there that understand that they get paid to play. You can't make you can't make a paycheck from the tub, as it often said, right? So best ability is availability, and so when you factor all those things in, it's no surprise that even players are pushing towards these kind of rules that are changing essentially the effectiveness of their tackling abilities.
I think Adam Bighill would prefer tackling in meetings if you gave him the opportunity. He's
Exactly.
One of those guys.
Exactly.
Jeff, right back to you on this one here. Watching all the games this weekend, a defensive back who will remain nameless intercepted a pass and then ran to the end zone for a celebration, which had me thinking, have we gone too far? Hey, I'm all about the party. I'm all about having good times and celebrating touchdowns. But are players going too far with the celebrations?
I don't think they're going far enough, to be honest with you. I think there's certain, understandings within those respective celebrations that lines, if you will, that you don't cross, right? If you're, certain, whether it's kind of sexual positions or whether it's the usage of guns and stuff. But outside of that, man, I'm watching NFL preseason, and when a guy scores, especially on the home side, there's fireworks, man. You want that moment to matter in a game. I love the sportsmanship aspect of getting a touchdown, handing the ball ball to the ref and then running to your line and high-fiving guys, but people are there to be entertained. Fans are there to be entertained. And part of that entertainment is scoring points, increasing offense, and when you score those points, to celebrate those points. So particularly on touchdowns, I think they should, erase all the rules, if you will, and just let guys have fun, let guys get creative. I mean, think about the NFL right now. Like, it was Sauce Gardner and Aaron Rodgers. Like, I don't know if you guys saw that cigarette thing, whatever. I don't think anyone's even talking about preseason. They keep talking about that celebration that happened on the sideline. People want to be entertained. They want to see the personality of these players. And to me, touchdown celebrations allow for players and teams to show some of that personality, to get that, kids doing those celebrations when they're out on their field. I think that's an important part of growing the game. And while there are some people who are going to be traditional and want that to be buttoned up, to me, I say let all hell break loose when it comes to touchdown celebrations.
But Scott, on a fumble recovery or an interception, do we end up in the end zone for that kind of stuff, taking pictures of each other?
Well, we've limited what defensive players can do, so I am going to give the defensive players a little bit of latitude here, Bubba. To me, it's time and place. And if you're down 52-14 and you score or you pick off a pass, don't go celebrating. But sure, I think we all know when it's a big moment in a game, if it's a fumble recovery that changes momentum, gives your team an opportunity to win a game or to all of a sudden come back in a game, okay, go celebrate that. But the ones I don't like are, hey, I got a first down, but we're getting smoked, and it's the first down we've had in 9 minutes. Okay, I don't need to see a first down celebration there. I'm fine with the touchdown celebrations. I'm like Jeff. I like to see the innovative stuff. I like players to showcase their personalities, especially in football where you've got a helmet on, you've got a mask. People don't get to see your personality all the time. I say the more innovative, the better, but just know your time and know your place.
I'm okay with celebrations, man. I think we're in the entertainment business, and it's so competitive now to get seen that, you kind of can't dumb it down. And I'll give you an example even one time. Like, I remember it was when Chris Jones was coaching in Saskatchewan, and there was a TSN camera, and he looked at the camera and said, "Get that camera out of my face." And we put it on SportsCenter. And a lot of people were like horrified that we did that, right? But you know what? That brought out some of Chris Jones's character. That was something to remember him by. Oh yeah, that's that coach that turned to the sideline and said, "Get that camera out of my face," right? And it brings attention, and it revealed something about Chris, right? So I think just in general, we're kind of a bit more of a sort of let it fly, in terms of culture and television right now, because you don't want to go to the extremes, right? But I think the idea of defaulting towards stuff that's going to be remembered, that's going to get noticed, that's going to get chatted about out of necessity is kind of where we are, and that's I would throw celebrations kind of into that mix. Like some of the Argo ones, like when they did the eating and stuff. Like, hey man, like you practice all week in football, you only play one day. You want to have fun when you get to the end zone, go ahead.
Well, we live in this 15-second reel world now, right? Where like those clips are the ones that last. Those are the ones that go viral, and those are the ones that younger audiences, the leagues like the CFL or NFL or any sports league for that matter, is desperate to gain that younger audience. Those are kind of the snippets that fans like of that ilk, of that age, right? And it's like I was saying to Scott, like I mean, there's been so many great plays. Nathan Rourke obviously was a great play in his game, but like most of the videos I've seen are of Aaron Rodgers and Sauce Gardner doing that cigarette thing on celebration on the sideline. Like fans eat that stuff up. They love it. They remember guys. It shows personality. It shows all those things that you as a league want to show, especially the CFL, who claim to be an accessible league. The players are only within arm's reach, right? In a lot of cases, they certainly are. Celebrations to me are a big part of that.
Well, and you bring up something that I was actually going to mention when we were having the tackling conversation as well. What makes you money? Getting on SportsCenter, getting on all of the highlight reels, having a viral video from your game. And you know what does that? Turnovers do that. Big hits, so guys torpedoing and flipping guys over does that. Does a form tackle stop for 7 yards do that? No. Your stats accrue over the course of a year, but you don't necessarily become known for those things. They're not counting stats in the way that people measure fantasy football anymore. And I do think that plays into it, this highlight reel culture that we're in as far as sports go. Guys know they can make money for those big plays. And I think part of that is, we call it a business decision because they want to protect their bodies. I think it's a business decision for a couple of different reasons on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, the nice thing with football players in terms of like celebrations and other things, they actually have personalities.
Yes.
Okay? Unlike another sport that we have all covered. You know, and I was at a camp the other day, and I was waiting for a player to interview, and he's playing Connect 4. You know that game where you drop the thing? And I'm like, he's playing Connect 4? And I didn't actually realize that it was a bit that they were taping until he got up and I saw the mic pack that he was removing from his belt when he got up and came over to my interview. And I don't know what they were doing, but obviously it was, and this was a prominent player. So, they're just doing some fun skit that, hey, you're killing time during training camp sitting in the sun playing Connect 4 against another guy, right? And that'll end up on some viral video and people say, hey, did you see the video of so-and-so playing Connect 4? It's all in the spirit of entertainment.
All right, folks. Everyone's going wild over Nathan Rourke's wild TD pass against the Dallas Cowboys. So I'll ask you there, Mr. Naylor, because you are there watching the man. Does success for CFL players when they do go to the National Football League, does that help or hurt the three-down game?
Oh, I think it absolutely helps. And I think it, because you want the next guy who's sitting there on the bubble and believing that he can play in the NFL to make his journey through the CFL. And let's be honest, most of them that come never go back, right? Especially the quarterback position. So you want to create that belief in a player that this is a viable road to the NFL. And look, I also think it speaks, and people have said this, it's great to watch Nathan Rourke, light up the CFL. But it also speaks, it does something for the credibility of our game when he goes, and I wouldn't say he lit up the Dallas Cowboys the other day, but he was very competent. I mean, almost to the point that the one play kind of obscured how competent he was. He was 5 for 5 on third down conversions after his first drive and facing a lot of, first and 20, second and 16s because his team had so many penalties. And it was funny, just to share this as an anecdote. So I'm in a stadium with like 85,000 people. And Nathan Rourke makes the play that is not just the play of the game, it's the play of the NFL preseason, and it may be that one of the plays of the NFL all year, and the stadium's going wild about it and all this, but nobody cares about the third-string quarterback in Jacksonville. I go into the locker room. On my way in, I pass Trevor Lawrence, who's going to the podium, okay? I go to Nathan Rourke's locker, and it just felt like, given the excitement of the moment and the reaction and Patrick Mahomes' way in, I'm like, oh my God, I got to get down to Nathan's locker, and battle 20 other guys elbow to elbow to try to get a word. I walk up to him. I'm the only one there. I literally walk up to him while he's putting his socks on. He's like, hey, Dave. Hey, Dave, how you doing? Great going. Nice play. Oh, yeah. It's just football, man. Like, it was kind of surreal to be in the biggest football stadium in the world and just witness such a spectacular play in front of a huge crowd and go down and just kind of casually chat with the guy at his locker. So, it just kind of puts it in perspective that most of the world doesn't know who Nathan Rourke is or didn't know who Nathan Rourke is. And I think that's the important part. When you put a play like that down and it goes around, all of a sudden he's that guy who made that play. And it's funny because I was even at Houston Texans camp the next day and then, was chatting with people and, hey, what are you doing, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, yeah, we were lucky we were in Dallas when, the Canadian kid made the spectacular play. Well, they didn't even know he's a Canadian kid, but they knew the play. So I think, it's specifically to Rourke, whether it's that play or whether it's the way he played overall, and we'll see where this progresses because he's probably not going to see a lot of time in the regular season. Overall, I think this is unquestionably a good thing for the CFL.
Scott, it's interesting. I watched a local report out of Jacksonville, and when they were talking about Nathan, they didn't say he was from the CFL. They said he played pro football elsewhere.
But those stories come out. Those stories come out and the path gets talked about. It might not be on that particular report, but I'm with Dave. It is unequivocally good for the league when these stories happen because the players themselves become champions of the league when they get a microphone in front of their face, when they get a little bit of spotlight. Look what Cam Wake did for the CFL once he got there, became a Pro Bowler, and and told everybody, hey, I had to go through the CFL, but I found out how good the football is out there. Joe Horn, all those years ago, anytime there was a primetime game for the Saints, he'd introduce himself as Joe Horn, CFL. That's what he would say. It shows other players a path, because there are a number of CFL players who don't become stars in the NFL, but make a very good living, and they end up talking to practice roster players, those bubble players that Dave referred to. What should I do? I'm at a point in my career where I really want to play. I don't want to keep bouncing around. You know what? Why don't you go ply your trade in the CFL? Some of those players, and we've talked to a lot of them over the years, guys, they end up loving life in Canada. They end up loving the game, and they become vibrant parts of our community as well. So unequivocally, this is a great thing for the Canadian Football League.
You know, Jeff, it's interesting. I watch guys come and go, and as we all have over the years, bouncing between leagues. And I look at the backup quarterback situation in many teams across the National Football League, and the retreads are unbelievable. Yet a guy like Chris Streveler can't get a break. Now, was that performance-based in your opinion? Or?
So I was going to say, I think we got a taste of that last offseason when Chris Streveler was the MVP of the preseason and couldn't find a home, right, for all that long, right, or carve out a. I mean, for everything that Chris Streveler was in the CFL, for what he's done in the NFL, he has carved out an incredible tenure at the NFL. I think he's already on that alumni pension at this point. So, he's done a lot. I think Nathan Rourke going up there and Chris Streveler going up there are two very different players, very different skill sets. And I think whether you want to call it performance-based, why Chris Streveler never stuck around or probably won't make a career, much longer of a career out of it, is because he was never really utilized the way he was supposed to, should have been utilized, like he was in the CFL. I mean, he was a linebacker / running back in the CFL who could complete some throws. In the NFL, he was asked to complete throws and more, which is not too much to ask out of a quarterback, mind you. But, for a guy like Chris Streveler, I think he had his time in the NFL. It was really exciting. Where I think Nathan Rourke has some real potential is what Nathan Rourke was able to do in the CFL was significantly more than what Chris Streveler was able to do in the CFL. And the suggestion that Nathan Rourke could go up there and do some damage, whether it was, it certainly is heightened by the play we just saw against the Dallas Cowboys and just what he was able to go through on that sequence to complete the pass for a touchdown. To me, it's the guy's work ethic, right? It completely makes sense to me that this guy chose Jacksonville. He chose a program that he was confident in. He chose a coaching staff that he knew he could grow in, under a Trevor Lawrence who he could learn from and all those things. So that word of mouth got around to other teams, and I think he's doing just that. But to the original question, I can't think of a single negative for the CFL, because whether it's showing guys an opportunity, an outlet to go through there, or it's just having guys, because Chris Streveler is the CFL's #1 fan. He's going down there and telling anybody who will listen just how great of a time he had in the Canadian Football League. And sometimes that's just enough for guys who don't even know what the CFL is. The CFL has certainly made strides in the U.S., has cracked, that market, if you will, still has a lot of room to grow, of course, but there's still so many players out there that don't even know the CFL is an option. So just another guy going down there, making plays, showing that he came from a league that maybe not many people know, and the ones that do know adore down there, just adding to that narrative is a massive, massive, massive benefit for the CFL and the three-down game here.
And credit to the BC Lions and kind of the CFL in general that's kind of grown up about this guys going to the NFL thing. Like 20 years ago, they would not have shown a highlight of a former CFL player doing something in the NFL in the stadium 20 minutes after it happened. And, it would have been, there was almost like this don't say N, word culture about the National Football League that you almost, I don't want to say people hope those guys failed, but I think some people did. It was kind of this whole us against them thing. Let's acknowledge what the National Football League is, right? Let's acknowledge what the Canadian Football League is. They're different beasts, and they each, survive and thrive on their own merits. But we should never, be disappointed when a guy leaves our league and gets an opportunity in the NFL. We should celebrate it, and kudos on the Lions for doing that.
Teams used to be against it. Chris Walby said on the pregame show of the Bombers on Bonfire Sports with Darren Bombing how he went to when he came back, he went to Cincinnati or something, had a taste, had a tryout with the NFL. When he came back, they forced him to take less money. They said, here's your contract because you went to the NFL. And because he loved Winnipeg so much, he stayed here, but he took a pay cut as a punishment to try out to get NFL interest. I mean, that was obviously decades ago, but that spoke to the differences between now and back then on the feeling of the NFL and this insecurity, if you will, that somehow success down there is somehow an embarrassment up here or something.
All right, fellas. Elks at Tiger Cats. Bombers at Stamps. Owls at Red Blacks. Lions at Riders. Scott Rintoul, the game of the week is...
I'm going to say, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, Owls at Red Blacks because of the importance of this game for Ottawa in particular. Look, you can make an argument for a couple other games. It's going to be tough to sell that first one you rolled out, Bubba, but for a couple of the other games, you can make an argument. But Owls and Red Blacks had the game within their grasp last week. Can they get up off the mat and make this a real race in the East? Can Montreal pull away? This is a real opportunity for Ottawa. Do we see some desperation football out of the Red Blacks? I've got that as my game of the week for those reasons.
Mr. Naylor.
I'm going along with that because, the Red Blacks are the most entertaining team with a losing record we've seen in a long, long time. And that's what, I do Ottawa's pregame show every week, and I kind of remind people that is a little bit is kind of like, the record may not be great, but like the fans are getting their money's worth of that team. Like it's not like watching the Elks, right? And the Javon Lee touchdown aside, that's another 4-point game for them, right, or whatever. Another less than one score game. That's the other thing with Ottawa. You generally get close games. You get good fourth quarters, and they did it again on the other night. So yeah, I'm going. And the other thing is, and those other three, it's not a tough competition right now. I got to be honest for all three of them right now.
Jeff, just a year ago, Stamps at Bombers, which is the two games they played last year, at least the first two, they were unbelievable.
Earlier this season, it had a ton of hype, but that speaks to what the Calgary Stampeders have become this season. Heading at 3-6 at the midway mark of the year, that's not screaming must-watch football, and I mean they've certainly had their struggles. I can't argue with the obviously the Alouettes at Red Blacks. I think I'm rooting for history this year. I think it's a long shot, but I'm hoping for an East crossover from the West. The first time never happened before. So if that could happen, I mean, what's happening in Saskatchewan and the way they're playing. I mean, Mason Fine looks like he's going to be out for some time as they pick up Antonio Pipkin. It doesn't look good for them. Calgary Stampeders doesn't look good for them, especially with the Bombers and the Lions, coming up here on the schedule. And the Ticats, if they can figure things out against the Elks this week, which every other team has been able to this year, all of a sudden you're looking at those standings, and the West has already really become a two horse race. It looks like the Toronto's pretty healthy in the East, but that mushy middle in the East, I think, could be one to keep an eye on. And if the West keeps trending the way it's been trending, we could be talking about an East crossover in a month or two.
Jeff, just because you're close to the situation, Drew Brown Part 2 this week, you think?
That's my gut feeling, just because just with the competition they're playing, where they're at in the season, just to be overly cautious and give Claros whatever time he needs. I would also not be surprised if he played. So not much of an answer, but I would go with, I would imagine, given the way Drew Brown played last week, he has earned another opportunity to go into Calgary and show what he's got.
Guys, just fabulous podcast again. Outstanding opinions. This is why we bring you guys in. You guys are the best in the business, and we just love having you here on the CFL this week. As we like to do at the conclusion of the podcast, David Naylor, fans I know are tweeting at you. Where can they do so, or where would they like to email you or contact you to talk about the CFL?
Twitter, at TSN Dave Naylor. Very simply.
Scott?
At Scott Rintoul. That's Rintoul with a U, an O-U-L. You can find me there on Twitter and on Instagram at Scott Rintoul Pro.
Mr. Hamilton.
At Jeff K. Hamilton on Twitter or on X. And soon to be Threads. Perhaps.
Threads. Does anyone really believe in this Threads? Like, is it just me?
I got a profile with no profile pic yet, so that's where I'm at with Threads right now.
All All right, guys. Thank you so much again. We appreciate your time and hope you really enjoyed this, folks. Hey, like, subscribe. You know all the things with the podcast. 5-star rating. We really appreciate it. We love doing it for you 3-down football fans. Folks, this is the CFL This Week. I'm Bubba O'Neil, and you're listening to the Ticats Audio Network.